I'm only here to return this envelope." The voice, weak yet steady, came from a 13-year-old street kid with sun-browned skin, worn-out shorts, and flip-flops that were about to fall apart. He clutched a brown envelope in both hands as if he were carrying something far heavier than paper. In the boardroom, the silence was broken by the millionaire's laugh. "You came to return money, that's it?" he mocked, leaning back in his leather chair. "A street kid bringing back an envelope. How original." A few executives lowered their eyes, pretending to focus on spreadsheets. Up above, behind tinted glass, someone else watched the scene through security cameras. An elderly man with white hair, a tired expression, and sharp eyes was not laughing. He tightened his grip on his cane while the boy, unaware of how confusing this all was for them, simply repeated, staring at the envelope, "It's not mine. I found it in the trash. It has your names on it. I just came to return it." The millionaire laughed even louder, but whoever truly ran things in that building was not amused. At that exact moment, the real owner decided that this boy was not leaving until he knew exactly what was inside that envelope. Before the story had even begun for the boy, it had already begun for the company, for the people who thought everything was under control. And before we go any further, imagine the narrator on a channel saying, "Subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this only reach those who need them when someone helps them travel." Sometimes justice arrives from the last place anyone expects. That day, before he walked into a cold room full of expensive suits, the boy, whose name was Noah, had been just another face the city pretended not to see. Noah was 13, thin, with a mop of curly hair that hadn't seen a barber in months. He slept wherever he could, in a closed-up storefront near a bakery that sometimes gave him and other kids day-old bread. But he had not been born on the street. No child is born a street kid. Noah's life had started in a cramped house with a cold tile floor, old ceramic walls, and the smell of watery coffee and bar soap. His mother, Grace, was the kind of woman who spent her days scrubbing other people's homes and still came back apologizing for being tired. He liked the way she hummed softly while washing clothes. The only thing he had from his father was his last name and a vague memory, a tall, bearded man who left one day to sort out a few things and never came back. No one truly explained whether he had gone for good or not. There was only silence and Grace's blank expression every time someone asked about him. When Noah was 9, life became far too complicated. The rent was overdue, the power was cut off. Grace's employer dismissed her without pay because things weren't working out anymore. Then came the eviction. One night on the sidewalk with a few bags of clothes and the promise, "Tomorrow we'll fix this." That tomorrow never showed up. Grace got sick. At first it was tiredness, then fever, then dizziness and shortness of breath. One day, she collapsed in the street. An ambulance took her to a public health center and then to a hospital. Noah watched his mother disappear through a white door and not come back. He didn't know it yet, but that door would be the last time he saw her alive. A social worker arrived with complicated words and explanations far too quick for a child to understand. They spoke of hospitalization, tests, treatment. They also said he couldn't stay there alone. They offered him a shelter. Noah tried it for a few days, but he couldn't adapt. He missed his mother's voice, even when she was angry, even when she was exhausted. One day, he simply ran away. The street became his home. The traffic light became his workstation. He wiped car windows, helped carry bags, ran small errands for change, and when his stomach was full enough, he collected cans and rummaged through trash for leftover food. It was on one of those evenings, with the sun already setting and the heavy smell of garbage rising from the sidewalks, that everything truly began. Noah was behind a huge office building, the kind with mirrored glass facades he was used to seeing only from afar. There, lined up against the wall, stood the company's giant plastic dumpsters, overflowing with torn black bags, wet paper, and all kinds of scraps. He handled the trash carefully because he already knew some bags hid broken glass, rats, or used needles. He separated aluminum cans into another bag. Every kilo earned him enough coins for some bread and a cup of coffee with milk at a diner where no one bothered to ask his age. In the middle of that nauseating stench, something different caught his eye. It was an envelope. Brown, thick, not torn, only a bit dirty at the corner. It didn't look like leftover food packaging. It looked like something someone had thrown away in a rush. Noah picked it up and tapped it against his leg to shake off dust and grease. Then he noticed, printed small in one corner, a symbol he had seen on signs all over the city. A blue and gold logo with the name of the real estate group that seemed to control half the buildings in town. He couldn't read every word, but he recognized the design. He had heard people at the bus stop say things like, "That company belongs to that millionaire from TV, the one who buys everything, the one who runs the whole city." The envelope was sealed, but the flap was held only by a paperclip, not glue. Noah thought about opening it. Curiosity, natural in a 13-year-old, buzzed inside him, but his mother's voice came back like a scolding. "What isn't ours, we don't take, even if it's been thrown away." He swallowed hard, traced the logo with his finger, and muttered to himself, "This has to be important to somebody." He could have sold it as cardboard. He could have tossed it back into the trash. He could have forgotten it. But something deep inside him, the leftover shape of the upbringing his mother had tried to give him, refused to let it go. That night, he barely slept. He held the envelope like a pillow, asking himself if he was being ridiculous. Who would care about an envelope that had fallen behind a dumpster? Who would thank a street kid for returning anything? Even so, at dawn, he made the strangest and most important decision of his life. He was going to walk up to the front door of that huge building and give it back, not because he expected a reward, but because if he didn't, it would feel like betraying his mother. When he reached the glass entrance, he froze. He looked at the security guard, who was already frowning at the sight of this kid approaching the door. Noah's heart hammered hard. The urge to turn and run back to the uncomfortable safety of the street was overwhelming. Then he took his first step inside. As Noah entered the lobby, the first thing he felt was the cold air conditioning against the warm skin of someone who had spent the whole day outdoors. The floor shone so much, he was afraid he might slip. He hesitated, stepping back a little, as if his own body were warning him, "This place isn't meant for you." The doorman walked toward him with one hand raised. "Hey kid, this isn't a place to beg. Turn around and go back." Noah gripped the envelope tighter. "I'm not here to ask for anything, sir," he said quietly but clearly. "I just came to return this. It was in the trash out back. It has the company's name on it." The guard looked him up and down, faded t-shirt, baggy shorts, flip-flops barely hanging on. Then he glanced at the crumpled, dirty envelope. "Then throw it back in the trash. This is a major corporation, not some shabby lost and found." Noah wanted to obey, turn his back, vanish. But he remembered his mother's phrase, the one she repeated like a prayer. He drew a deep breath. "It's not mine," he insisted softly. "I think it's important. I just want to give it to someone inside." The security guard rolled his eyes, tired of arguing with a street kid. He could have simply dragged him out. At that moment, though, a young woman at the reception desk, who had been listening from a distance, looked up. Her name was Julia. She had worked there for years and knew too well how it felt to be treated as if you were worth nothing. "Let him speak, Mr. Morris," she said without raising her voice. At least let us take the envelope and pass it on." Noah turned toward her with a grateful look. She gestured to the counter. "Come here, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Noah," he answered. "All right, Noah. Let me see that envelope." He stretched his arms across the marble counter, barely reaching. Julia took the envelope, wiping at the grime as if she were brushing away prejudice instead of dirt. When she turned it over, she saw the company logo, the stamp of the legal department, and the printed signature of someone important. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. This was not ordinary trash. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, now fully alert. "Out back, near the big dumpsters," Noah replied. "It was kind of hidden. I was collecting cans, and then I saw it." Julia bit her lip. That area behind the building was where documents were taken for disposal. Normally everything went straight through an industrial shredder. It was strange for anything intact to end up in the trash that way. She looked around. The lobby was quiet. Rush hour had passed. She walked over to an internal phone with the envelope in hand. On the 14th floor, in a glass-walled meeting room overlooking half the city, a group of men and a few women sat around a long table. At the head of it, speaking loudly and gesturing theatrically, was the star of the moment, the so-called modern millionaire, the new public face of the group, always in the media, always at events. His name was Kyle Ferris. Immaculate suit, easy smile, the voice of someone who had learned to command too early. Officially, he was the CEO. In practice, many feared him as if he owned everything. While he talked about profits, the office phone rang. An assistant answered and whispered in his ear. "What?" Kyle snapped impatiently. "A street kid with an important envelope." A few people chuckled uneasily. Julia, on the other end of the line, pressed on. "Sir, the document has the legal department's stamp and your printed signature. I really think you should take a look." He heard that part, and his smile froze for a moment. His signature. A legal document. How had that ended up in a dumpster? He inhaled slowly, leaned back in his chair, and decided to make a joke out of it for the audience. "Fine, send him up. It'll be my charitable act of the day." He hung up. Minutes later, Noah walked into the boardroom, flanked by the security guard and Julia, feeling smaller than ever. Kyle let out a little laugh when he saw him. "Here's our distinguished guest," he said, standing with exaggerated courtesy. "So you found something of ours in the trash, huh?" Noah shrugged slightly. "Yes, sir. It was in a black bag out back. It has your names on it. I just came to return it. I don't want any trouble." Someone snickered from one corner of the table. Kyle took the envelope from Julia's hand and stared at it for a long time. A prickling discomfort crawled up his spine, but he didn't show it. Instead, he chose mockery. "Tell me, kid," he said, spinning the envelope between his fingers. "Didn't you think about selling this? Trading it for something to eat? I mean, people on the street don't usually give anything back, you know that?" Noah felt his face burn and looked at the floor. "My mom always said you don't keep what doesn't belong to you, even if someone else threw it away." Someone exhaled in annoyance. "How cute," Kyle replied with sarcasm. "A street philosopher." What Kyle ignored was that the whole scene was being watched in almost complete silence by someone who knew humiliation all too well, but had never gotten used to it. In a smaller room on the top floor, the company's founder, Arthur Nolan, sat in front of a wall of monitors. His white hair was neatly combed, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, and his cane resting on the desk. Since his health had started to decline, they had pushed him away from the company's daily operations for his own good. They told him he was tired, that it was time for the new generation to handle everything. When the image on the screen showed the skinny boy in flip-flops holding the envelope, Arthur leaned forward and turned up the volume. He saw Kyle laughing, saw the others look away. He also saw the logo in the corner of the envelope. He recognized that kind of paper, recognized the format, and, more importantly, recognized the printed signature on the side when Kyle turned it. He still hadn't read the contents, but a chill ran down his spine. In that moment, he understood two things: that envelope was not just a scrap of paper, and that this boy could not simply be kicked out like garbage. Arthur pressed the intercom button that connected him to his personal assistant. "Call Kyle now," he said, in a voice stronger than it had sounded in months. "Tell him to bring the envelope and the boy." Down in the boardroom, the phone rang again. Kyle picked up, listened to the message, and for a second, lost his breath. "Mr. Nolan wants to see the kid?" he repeated, incredulous. The laughter in the room stopped. Kyle tried to hide his discomfort. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. He turned to the guard. "Take him upstairs, and the envelope too. Mr. Nolan wants to see it." Noah had no idea who this Mr. Nolan was. When the door to Arthur's office opened, the boy smelled a mix of medicine and stale coffee. The old man was seated in a leather armchair. "Come in, son," he said, in a tone more like a neighborhood grandfather than a magnate. "What's your name?" "Noah," he replied almost in a whisper. Arthur repeated the name as if tasting it. "They told me you found something of ours in the trash and brought it back." He held out his trembling hand. The guard placed the envelope in it. Kyle leaned against the wall, arms crossed, trying to look calm while a storm raged inside him. "It must just be some old paperwork," Kyle rushed to say. "The legal department probably tossed it. Nothing important." Arthur didn't respond. He put on his glasses and opened the envelope carefully. Noah didn't understand a single line of those pages full of dense legal language, but he noticed that, as Arthur read, his expression changed. The old man turned a page, read a handwritten note at the bottom, and recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't his. It was Kyle's. Arthur slowly raised his eyes. "You said this was old paperwork, didn't you?" he asked, still holding the page. Kyle cleared his throat. "Yes, that's right. Standard procedures, technical details, nothing you need to worry about." "Strange," Arthur murmured, "because right here it says that I authorized a budget cut for a project I created myself, a project that carries my own name. And more than that, it says I agreed to lay off half the team, including people who've been with this company since we fit inside a rented office." He picked up another sheet, this one heavily underlined. "And here, there's a report stating that the founder is no longer capable of understanding complex decisions and should therefore just sign wherever he's told." Noah couldn't read well, but he understood founder and incapable. He looked at the old man and saw something familiar in his eyes, the feeling of being treated as less, as different, as disposable. Kyle tried to smile. "Arthur, you know how legal jargon is. That's just how they phrase things." "A polite way of calling me a senile old fool on paper," Arthur concluded calmly, "and using my name to do as you please." He placed the sheet on the desk and took a deep breath. "Do you know what strikes me most, Kyle?" he continued. "It's not even what's written here. It's where it ended up, in the trash, at the bottom of a dumpster, intact, with your handwriting on it, and in the hands of a boy who doesn't even have a roof over his head, but still understands right and wrong better than many of the people in suits upstairs." Kyle felt the blow and clenched his jaw. "You're going to take the word of some kid who digs through garbage?" he snapped, losing his composure. "That document could have been replaced. It was nothing." Arthur's cane struck the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. "Enough." He turned again to Noah. "Tell me exactly how you found this, son." Noah swallowed. "I was picking up cans back there, sir. I always go there." I saw a torn bag with some good papers still inside. This one was folded. I saw the logo in the corner and remembered my mom used to say that anything with someone else's name on it should be returned, not kept. That's all. In a single sentence, Noah had summed up what many adults had forgotten. Arthur's tired mouth curved into a faint smile. Your mother was wise. He placed the envelope carefully on the table. From today on, Noah, you're not leaving this building without being heard. He turned to the guard. He's my guest. No one lays a hand on him. Kyle stepped forward. You can't seriously be thinking. I can, and I am. Arthur cut him off. Because if a boy pulling scraps from a dumpster has more respect for this company than a well-paid executive, then maybe I've been trusting the wrong person. A shiver ran down Noah's back. It wasn't fear. After Arthur asked everyone else to leave, the room fell quiet, just the old man and the boy. Arthur drew a long breath, leaned his head back, and stayed silent for a few seconds. It was not only the contents of the envelope weighing on him, it was the whole mental film unspooling in his head. Years of trusting reports more than his own instincts, all the times he had swallowed his discomfort because he was too tired to argue. Noah, not knowing what to do with his hands, stood near the door. He didn't understand the big words, but he understood that look. It was the same look his grandmother had given the grocery owner when she discovered he had added a little extra charge to her tab. Do you have family, Noah? Arthur asked, still not looking at him. Just my grandmother, Mrs. Ruth, Noah answered. My mom died a long time ago. My dad, I barely remember him. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, as if someone had touched a sore spot inside him. Just picturing a grandmother raising a grandson alone tightened his chest, because in another house in that same city, someone else had been taking care of him for years. From a distance, his own daughter, Helen. Helen was Arthur's only child. She had studied abroad, come back full of modern ideas, and had married none other than Kyle, the ambitious young man Arthur himself had hired when he was barely out of school. At first, Arthur thought it was a blessing, an educated son-in-law, brilliant with numbers, who spoke eloquently at meetings. Over time, though, Kyle took up too much space. He convinced Helen that her father was tired, that the company needed to be professionalized, that the founder should simply rest and retire. Torn between love for her father and fear of losing her husband, Helen started giving in on things she should have questioned. She let her husband filter everything before it reached Arthur. Meetings, reports, decisions. The old man began to walk into his own building like an honored guest instead of its owner. And now a boy from the dumpster was unknowingly showing him the exact point where trust had turned into betrayal. Arthur called the guard back. I want you to bring Helen, he said firmly, and also Mr. Harris, the old accountant. You remember him? The guard nodded, and no one says a word to Kyle, not yet. Meanwhile, Noah was invited to sit. He hesitated but obeyed, perching on the edge of the chair as if he might dirty the expensive furniture. Are you going to throw me out after this? He asked quietly. If you want, I'll go. I just didn't want to see something important dumped in the trash. Arthur shook his head. You brought me more than a piece of paper, son. You brought me a warning that even my own family didn't have the courage to give. He said, family, like something cracked. Minutes later, Helen walked in. She wasn't some glamorous socialite. She had dark circles under her eyes, her hair hastily tied back, and her phone in her hand as if she were trying to control the world from one screen. Dad, what happened? Kyle said you got upset over some old paperwork. You can't just... She stopped when she saw Noah. Her gaze slid over his worn flip-flops, his simple t-shirt, his nervous eyes. Who is this boy? Arthur rose slowly, leaning on his cane. This boy did today what many well-dressed people here haven't had the courage to do in years, he replied. He returned what wasn't his. "I don't understand," Helen said, frowning. Arthur placed the envelope in her hands. "Read it, slowly, as if it were about someone you love." She began to read, and as she understood, her expression changed. There were phrases about an unfit founder, cuts approved in her father's name, signatures effectively forced on a tired, misinformed man. Helen felt a hot wave of shame rising up her neck, because there, in black and white, was the portrait of something she had half sensed but never wanted to face. Kyle had been using her father's name as a shield for decisions he made alone, without explaining them properly, without leaving room for questions. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you never saw this?" "Not like this," he answered. "I was given neat summaries, glossy presentations on tablets. Whatever they didn't want me to see, they threw in the trash." Helen sat down slowly, looked again at the envelope and then at Noah. Suddenly, the distance between the rooftop with its city view and the alley behind the building felt much shorter. In her mind, an uncomfortable question exploded. How many hurts like this boy's had been hidden behind cold phrases like staff adjustment or cost reduction? Outside, Kyle was pacing the corridor as if walking over cracked ground, still unaware that the kid he'd dismissed as a petty nuisance had just exposed the dirty game he'd been playing for years. To him, that envelope had been nothing more than a risk to be eliminated. In the founder's and his daughter's hands, it became proof that the company was being driven toward a future Arthur had never wanted, a future of high profits and little respect. Helen still held the envelope when there was another knock on the door. It was Kyle. He walked in almost uninvited, wearing his flawless jacket and expensive cologne, radiating the confidence of someone who feels irreplaceable. He saw Arthur, saw his pale wife, saw Noah hunched in his chair. In a split second, he assessed the scene. "Everyone looks tense," he said with a forced smile. "Dad, I told the guys to handle that dumpster mess. We don't need to waste time with—" Arthur lifted his hand, signaling him to be quiet. A gesture Kyle might have brushed aside in the past now carried weight. "Sit down," the old man said. Kyle sat, reluctantly, eyes drifting to the envelope he recognized instantly. A cold shiver cut through him, though his trained face stayed neutral. "This document," Arthur began, "was found in our company's trash. In that trash, which you ordered, sent to the depot, are decisions signed in my name. Decisions I never approved the way they're written here. Decisions that dismiss people as if they were numbers, not human beings." Kyle tried to laugh. "Dad, you know every big company has drafts, minutes, old versions. This must be an outdated copy. And this kid," he looked at Noah with contempt, "probably grabbed it from the mess and doesn't even know what he's carrying." Helen took a deep breath. She couldn't pretend not to see anymore. "No, Kyle, this is not a draft. It has dates, names, employees I remember seeing crying in the hallway, and I stayed quiet. You told me it was necessary, that it was strategic." She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried the pain of someone finally admitting her own complicity, even if she hadn't meant harm. Kyle shifted tactics. His tone softened, as if he were trying to bring order back into the room. "Helen, you know how much I've done for this company. If we had to cut costs, it was to keep it afloat. The market is brutal. Your father was tired. I was protecting his legacy." That line had convinced Helen many times before. This time, it fell flat. Now there was proof that, along with protecting the legacy, what he had really been protecting most was his own power. Arthur spoke slowly, with a hint of weariness. "Protecting a legacy is not about tossing papers in the trash, Kyle. It's not about using my name to fire people without looking them in the eye. It's not about turning my signature into a rubber stamp." The silence grew thick. Noah watched everything, heart racing. He had never seen powerful people cornered. He was used to the opposite, the poor demanding answers, the rich telling them to be quiet. This time, it was different. Another knock at the door. It was Mr. Harris, the aging accountant with thinning hair and a battered briefcase, the very man who had once said he wouldn't last long in a place like this. "You asked for me, Mr. Nolan?" he said timidly. Arthur pointed to a chair. "Harris, do you remember these reports?" he asked, handing him the envelope. The accountant put on his glasses, scanned the pages, and let out a heavy sigh. "Yes, I do. At the time, I warned that this was wrong, that they were setting you up to take the blame for everything. After that, I stopped receiving that kind of paperwork. Only the clean versions landed on my desk." Kyle shifted in his seat. "With all due respect, Mr. Harris, you're mistaken. It was a long time ago. Memories fail." "My memory might," the accountant cut in, "but my conscience doesn't. And you know very well that many of these cuts were decided behind closed doors, with people saying, 'The old man doesn't need to know everything.'" Helen closed her eyes. She remembered a dinner where Kyle had said almost those exact words. "Honey, your dad can't handle so many details anymore. Let me take care of it." He had sounded so kind, so convincing, that it had felt like love. In reality, it had been indifference. Arthur placed both hands on the table. "Enough," he said. The word was not loud, but it carried a firmness no one had heard from him in a long time. "From today on, no major decision will go through this company without an independent audit. Harris, would you be willing to coordinate that again?" The accountant swallowed hard, visibly moved. "I'll do it, Mr. Nolan, for as long as I have strength." Arthur nodded and then looked at Noah. "And this boy stays?" Kyle almost jumped out of his chair. "Stays? What do you mean stays? He's a dumpster kid, Arthur. This is not a shelter." Noah lowered his head. He was ready to hear worse, but Arthur wouldn't allow it. "This trash picker, as you called him, has done more for this company's integrity today than many executives in suits," he said, breathing deeply. "Go to school, Noah. And if you want, you can also work here, not to serve coffee, but to truly learn how a company should treat its people." Noah was speechless. He could only shake his head, eyes brimming with tears. Kyle tried one last push. "You're going to destroy everything we've built because of a filthy envelope found in the trash and a kid who can barely read it." Arthur's gaze did not waver. He was tired, but clear-headed. "It's not the envelope, Kyle. It's what it reveals. And it's not the boy who worries me. It's the man who thinks that dirty paper is always where the truth belongs." The air in the room grew tense. Kyle realized, perhaps for the first time, that the rope had finally snapped on his side. That night, Arthur called a general meeting for the next day. Board of directors, legal counsel, human resources. No one knew exactly why, only that it was serious. Noah was allowed to leave for the day, but the old man insisted on one thing first. "Come back tomorrow," Arthur told him. "I want you here." Noah rode the elevator down with his head spinning. The next morning, even before the usual opening time, the company's atmosphere felt strange. Groups of employees whispered in the hallways, phones in hand, all talking about the same thing. Noah arrived in the cleanest clothes he owned, a washed t-shirt, hair combed with water, the same worn sneakers. In the wide hall, employees, managers, and administrative staff gathered, some with decades of service, others newly hired. Many feared losing their jobs. Few were used to looking the owner of the company in the eye. Arthur walked in slowly, supporting himself with one hand on the table. He didn't look weak, just tired. Tired of old habits, not of his body. Tired of carrying burdens he should never have had to. Beside him stood Helen, her face serious but steady. Further back was Kyle, arms crossed, wearing a hard expression, as if this were all an overreaction. And almost hidden in a corner by the door sat Noah, on a chair that felt too big for him, as if he could be thrown out at any moment. Arthur didn't take the microphone. He didn't give a pompous speech. He spoke like a neighbor. He said he was there to correct actions taken in his name, but without his consent. He admitted he had discovered decisions made in secret that used his signature to harm ordinary people while those at the top remained protected. Many lowered their eyes. This wasn't entirely new. Several had sensed the tension, the strange dismissals, co-workers leaving without explanation. Arthur drew a deep breath and explained, not in every detail, that an envelope had been found in the company's trash containing documents that never should have ended up there. It exposed a cowardly practice, blaming subordinates to protect those higher up. He didn't name names at first. Only afterward did he look at Kyle. Arthur said clearly that he had placed too much trust in his son-in-law, granting him power to make decisions beyond his oversight. That while Kyle claimed to protect the legacy, he had also hidden inhuman choices and used his father-in-law's name as a shield. No one was used to seeing a business owner apologize in front of his employees, much less watch him admit to a mistake involving his own family. Kyle tried to defend himself. He said it was all strategy, that the market was tough, that without those measures the company might have gone under. He talked about competition, figures, and results. Arthur listened and answered simply, "No number justifies throwing human beings in the trash." The sentence hung in the air. Then he did what no one expected. He apologized. It didn't magically fix anyone's problems, but it mattered. "I was wrong," he said. "Wrong by omission. I let people suffer without checking closely enough. From today on, that won't happen again. And if there are consequences, they should fall on me first." He announced the independent audit. A murmur rippled through the room, a mix of fear and relief. Only then did he call Noah forward. The boy hesitated. Helen gave him a small, encouraging nod. Noah walked up, legs trembling, never having stood before so many eyes. He stopped beside Arthur, who rested a hand on his shoulder. "This boy found something in our trash that belonged to us," Arthur explained. "He could have sold it, shredded it, ignored it, but he brought it back. In this building, too many people have been treated as disposable. Without even knowing it, he returned to us what many had lost, the chance to be taken seriously." Some employees began to connect the dots. They had already heard rumors about the kid with the envelope. Now they saw his face. Arthur announced in front of everyone that Noah would have support to study and, if he wished, an apprenticeship in the company, not as charity but as recognition. Some thought it was an overreaction. Others looked at him with envy. A few felt moved, thinking of their own children or grandchildren. Kyle seethed inside. He could feel power slipping through his fingers. To him, that gesture sent a clear message. The era in which he ruled unquestioned was ending. Finally, Arthur told Kyle that until the audit was finished, Kyle would be removed from decision-making. He called it a necessary measure. Kyle tried to protest, but Helen's eyes stopped him. It wasn't just his father-in-law saying, "Enough." His own wife, who had always defended him, now saw what she had refused to see. The meeting ended without applause. Employees left talking quietly, some hopeful, others wary. The veterans remembered friends who had suffered injustices, names that had disappeared from the rosters, people who had left with empty hands. Noah rode down in the elevator with his heart clutched tight. He didn't understand half the complicated terms, but he understood the essence. A wealthy old man had looked at him as a human being, and because of an envelope he had almost thrown away, important things were about to happen upstairs. On the crowded bus home, he rested his forehead against the window and thought about the folks on his block, the ones who'd been fired with no explanation. He also pondered one question that wouldn't leave him alone. What if that envelope had never landed in my hands? The answer hurt. None of this would have happened. It was tempting to chalk it up to destiny or God or something grand, but deep down he knew that sometimes the only difference between truth coming out or staying buried is that someone simply chooses not to turn away. That's what he had done. And though he had no idea where all of this was going, he felt something shift inside. His life had changed direction, not only his, but that of many people who would never set foot in the owner's office. The story of the envelope didn't take long to spread beyond the company's walls. First, it traveled down the corridors. One employee told another, who told a third, until it became the hot topic in the company's group chats. Did you hear? Old man Nolan gathered everyone, talked about past injustices, distanced himself from his son-in-law, and even defended a street kid. The next day, a journalist covering business news got a tip. Owner of a major company admits mistakes and creates compensation fund. He dug deeper, requested an official statement, spoke to an employee, and heard about a boy who had found an envelope in the trash and returned it. The article didn't mention every detail or every name, but one line said enough. A teenage boy living on the street found documents that had been improperly discarded and decided to return them to the company, triggering an internal review of past decisions. In Noah's neighborhood, the reaction was different. At the corner store, the owner proudly held up his phone. "It's this kid right here," he told customers. "He's always going by with his backpack, his bike, helping someone. I've never seen him take anything that isn't his." Mrs. Parker, sitting on the curb, ran a hand over her face, overwhelmed. She remembered all the times she had been shoved away from fancy building entrances like she was trash. Knowing that one of those buildings had finally listened to someone from her world stirred something deep inside. Some neighbors started looking at Noah differently. Before, he was the kid who delivered things. Now he was the boy with the envelope. No one turned him into a saint. There were still those who envied him, who whispered, who doubted. But even those who didn't particularly like him had to admit he had been brave. In the big house, the reaction was different again. Helen read the article at the kitchen table while her coffee grew cold. She didn't see herself as a victim, but she could no longer see herself as blind. She knew she had looked away from many of Kyle's choices for the family's sake. Kyle, in turn, began to feel the sting of his fall. He hadn't been arrested. He hadn't been cast out of the family. But he had lost something he'd never imagined losing: respect. Former business partners started avoiding him. Some feared for their own reputations. Others had benefited from similar schemes and were now terrified that another envelope might fall into some other boy's hands. At home, the silence between him and Helen said far more than any argument. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't a saint. But hearing her father look her in the eyes and admit, "I was wrong to trust your husband so completely," had shaken something inside her. Helen began remembering moments when she'd felt suspicious and chosen not to ask questions. From the day she saw too many documents being discarded to the way Kyle always treated employees as replaceable pieces. Now she was forced to revisit everything from a different angle. One night she read a brief story online about companies revisiting old decisions, opening the door to settlements with former employees who'd been harmed, trying to correct their course. No company names were mentioned, but she knew exactly where that story had begun, with a dirty envelope in a black bag behind a gleaming building, and with the people who had decided not to pretend they hadn't seen it. Meanwhile, Noah kept both feet firmly planted in real life. His friend's grandmother fell ill. He helped track down medicine. A neighbor ran out of gas. He joined others, chipping in a few dollars to refill the tank. A boy younger than him dropped out of school to work odd jobs all day. Noah, with the limited experience he had, tried to convince him that studying a little might change his future. He didn't turn into a flawless example of anything. He made mistakes, got tired, sometimes felt like quitting. But every time he walked down the alley behind the company and saw the trash area now fenced off, with cameras and signs about proper waste disposal, he felt a strange mix of old anger and new relief. At least now they know their garbage speaks, he thought. One afternoon, as he crossed the street with his backpack on, he heard someone call his name. It was Arthur, leaning against the door of a plain company car. No driver, no entourage. Heading home? The old man asked. Noah nodded. Me too, Arthur said. But before that, I wanted to ask you something. He paused, carefully choosing his words. Have you ever thought about working here someday? Not just delivering envelopes, but helping decide what never ends up in the trash again? Noah didn't answer right away. His heart pounded. His mind raced ahead toward a future he had never dared fully imagine. He stood there on the sidewalk for a few seconds, staring at Arthur's face, unsure whether this was a real question or a trick. Working there, in the same company he had entered, only to return a grimy envelope that smelled of garbage and hidden truths. In the same company where people in suits never looked toward the alley behind their building. He stayed quiet. First, he felt the weight of his backpack, the ache in his legs, the memory of all the times people had called him street kid, as if it were an insult. Arthur noticed his hesitation. You don't have to give me an answer now, he said gently. Think about it. If you ever decide you want to, that door won't just spin to throw you out. It'll open for you to come in. Noah managed a half smile, promising nothing. That night, lying on his simple bed with the city noise drifting through the window, he stared at the ceiling and thought of everything that had happened since the day of the envelope. He remembered how his hand had trembled when he first touched the paper. He remembered Kyle's mocking laugh in the boardroom. He remembered Arthur's eyes when he heard him say, I just came to return what belongs to you. Above all, he remembered Mrs. Parker, the neighbor who always said poor people's lives were like roller coasters, never just tragedy, never just miracle, always curves. The next day, after lunch, he headed down to the alley where the kids played soccer. The field was hard-packed dirt, the goalposts just two flip-flops marking the space, and the world of envelopes, CEOs, and conference rooms felt very far away. The boys bombarded him with questions. So, are you rich now? Gonna move into those fancy apartments? Gonna forget about us? Noah laughed awkwardly. I don't even know what I've become, he replied. All I know is that for the first time, someone up there called me in to talk while I'm still alive and awake. They laughed without fully understanding, but they laughed. Later, sitting on the curb with Mrs. Parker, he told her about Arthur's invitation. She listened in silence, stirring her coffee in a plastic cup. What are you afraid of? She finally asked. Noah grimaced. Of turning into one of them and forgetting this place. Or of staying here and missing the chance to change something there, she added, finishing his thought before he could. He fell quiet. She was right. Can I tell you something, Noah? She went on. When a door opens for someone who's never been invited in, it's not always about becoming someone else. Sometimes it's about taking who you are along with you. If you walk in and turn into just another one of them, yeah, you lose something. But if you walk in and never forget where you came from, maybe it's worth it. He didn't answer, but her words stuck. Days passed. Noah kept studying, helping his friend's grandmother, doing odd jobs. The company was deep into its internal review. Contracts were reevaluated, Some managers were moved to other departments, old files were pulled out of archives. Kyle, meanwhile, spent hours in tense meetings with his lawyers. He wasn't arrested, but he faced audits and uncomfortable questions. The hardest part wasn't the money, it was the looks. Suddenly, employees who had always kept their heads down started looking at him differently, not with open hatred, but with eyes that said, "Now we know." Helen decided to take some time away from the company to look after her children and try to regain her peace of mind. Arthur didn't distance himself from his daughter, but he never again covered anything up for the sake of family. On a rainy afternoon, Noah returned to the office, this time with no envelope in his hand, only a folded scrap of paper in his pocket. At reception, the woman who had once only seen him as just another kid passing through the lobby now greeted him with a quiet smile. "You can go up. He's expecting you." Noah stepped into the elevator, feeling that familiar mix of nerves and excitement that comes to someone who had always seen skyscrapers as another world. But something had changed. He no longer hid in the shadows. His name was written at the security desk. In the modest room where they had spoken before, Arthur sat with a neat folder. "I've been thinking about your question," Noah said right away. "I don't want to become a tie-wearing office guy, but I also don't want to spend my life complaining about the company without trying to change anything from the inside." Arthur nodded. "So you've decided?" Noah took a breath. "I'll say yes, but on one condition." His voice was firmer than he knew it could be. Arthur waited. "I don't want this chance to be only for me. I want that door that opened for me to open for other kids from the neighborhood too. Maybe as a course, an internship, anything we can do without flashy publicity. If it's just for me to go in and everyone forgets the rest, then it's not worth it." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. That wasn't the answer of an opportunist. It was the answer of someone who still had dust on his shoes and stories in his pockets. "It's decided then," Arthur said at last. "We'll start with you, but we won't stop with you." He led Noah into a small room where several chairs were lined up. 5 teenagers from the surrounding neighborhood sat there, all wearing the same blend of suspicion and hope Noah had once worn. "This first class exists because of you," Arthur told him, without grand speeches. "If you hadn't brought that envelope back, none of this would be happening." Noah fidgeted with his hands. He wasn't used to being pointed to as the cause of anything other than trouble. In the neighborhood, people began seeing him differently again, some with jealousy, thinking he had gotten lucky, others with a quiet respect that made no noise but weighed heavily. Mrs. Parker watched from her doorway, coffee in hand, eyes following everything. One day, as he passed by with a new backpack, she remarked, "Funny, isn't it? That envelope you found in the trash wasn't yours, but it gave back something that had always belonged to you." "What's that?" he asked. She smiled with one corner of her mouth. "Dignity. No one gave you that today. They just finally acknowledged it was already there." At the company, Helen slowly resumed her role, not as the wife who smiled for appearances, but as someone who knew in her gut where she'd gone wrong and where she could still improve. She didn't try to approach Noah with self-pity. One day she sat with him, without cameras, without an audience, and asked only one thing. "If you ever feel we're starting to repeat the same mistakes, say it, even if it's harsh. It's better to hear it now than to wait for another envelope to land in your hands." Noah made no promises, but he knew that if he spoke, no one could pretend they hadn't heard. Time passed. Life did not turn into a fairy tale, but it did shift. Noah kept living with his grandmother, Mrs. Ruth, now in a small but tidy house with no leaks, a stocked fridge, and her medication always on time. He still squeezed into crowded buses. He still walked the same streets and greeted the same neighbors. The difference was that when he left home with his backpack, he was no longer just the kid from the trash. He was the boy who had helped return the truth to where it belonged. And somewhere, in many other buildings where decisions are made far from the alleys behind them, the echo of that dirty envelope lingered as a warning. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It helps stories like this reach more people who also need to hear that they weren't born to carry someone else's guilt. Thank you.